everyone. Thanks for joining another episode of the PM Learning Series, live streaming events where we talk to industry thought leaders and product builders about their career journey and lessons learned along the way to inspire people like you to level up your product career. So my name is Shavi. I'm the host for this show. Please drop in the chat where you are joining us from. Please also subscribe to our newsletter in the event description in case you want to receive a recap of this event as well as future event updates. So today with me, let me brought Andre to the screen. Thank you so much, Andre. I first came across you by looking at a lot of the great posts that you put on LinkedIn. I think we're fellow content creators, and that's how I came across. And I definitely have studied some of your very best posts to sort of create inspiration, to inspire myself to write, learn by learning about some of your styles and tips, and definitely learn a lot from you. So really excited to have you here today. And thank you so much for joining us.
I'm super excited. Really appreciate the invite. I think what you're doing here is amazing. I mean, I look at the past guests and I feel the imposter syndrome kicking in. So hopefully I can keep the bar as high as you've been keeping for the last months.
No, definitely. I have full confidence. Everybody have imposter syndrome, and that's how you grow. So, but I'm really excited for you to be here, and we have a very interesting topic to talk about that I think with your unique experience you can bring to the table. So just very briefly, a quick intro. Andre is currently the VP of product at Kitch, a SaaS product looking to make every restaurant amazing at delivering food. Andre is also the founder of 1 Month PM, a product advisor and professor. So you have so many operating experience at various capacity across product management, product design, engineering, growth, marketing, and product operations. So really exciting to dive into some of that. And specifically, you have built product across different startup stages from 0 to 1, bootstrap to 30 million VC funding, up to selling a company. A lot of experience across different spectrums. So really excited to share your experience as well. And yeah, just trying to say hi to some of the folks. They're joining us from all over the world. We have Melinda from Ontario, Canada, folks from Vancouver, Indonesia, Germany, Virginia, Portugal. Please continue to drop in the chat, where you're joining us from. And thank you so much. I know it could be Friday night for some of you. So appreciate you taking the time to join us. All right. Without further ado, Andre, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career journey and how you transition into entrepreneurship and product?
Sure, happy to. So I think everything started at Google. I'm a business student in training, but at Google, I kind of learned two things. One, to think really big. And the second one is that I really don't want to be in a 50,000 people company. So I wanted to be in constant build mode. And that led me to startups, joining an early stage startup back in Portugal here, very early in the process. We grew a lot. So we were 5 or 6 when I joined, grew to 300, raised a few million. I joined in the growth area, and then I kind of accidentally fell into product management, which is what I think happens to most PMs. They thought, I'm good at communicating, breaking down problems, understanding people, maybe it makes sense. So that's how I got my first opportunity at product. There, helped grow the engineering, the product, the design team, over 50 people. And I think this is the kind of the first place I really saw the power of connecting the right people, the right motivation, the right mission, and using technology as a leverage to solve a lot of problems and create a lot of value. So I think that's kind of the start of my, or how I fell into entrepreneurship and product. And from there, it's continuing building product and working, as you said, across multiple stages.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. But first, let's say hi to a couple more people joining from Hungary, Hannah, Laura from Nigeria, New York, Sydney, Turkey, Paris, Dubai, and more from Nigeria, Armenia. Thank you so much for joining. And the Caribbean. Wow. It's a very international crew. Yeah, that's exciting. It's always excites me that we're able to influence and share the wisdoms to a global community of product builders. So, Andre, you mentioned quite a few things I want to unpack there. But first, you worked at both a 50,000 and more people company, but also working at a smaller startup, and lucky enough to sort of overseen like the growth, from a pretty early stage to a good size. What would you say are the major sort of pros and cons for working at a large company versus being part of the founding team of a smaller company and seeing that growth? And before you answer, by the way, everyone who's joining, if you have questions for Andre, please drop them in the chat and we'll feature them from time to time.
Yeah, I think so. On your question, so I'm going to use like three variables that I think matter the most, and what's the reality of these three variables, depending whether you're in a small startup, whether you're a founder, a member of the founding team, or just joined the startup, and versus a large company. I think the first one is pretty obvious. It's a sense of ownership, right? You actually have skin in the game when it's your company, when you're a founder. It's either you execute, you make it happen, you make it grow, because maybe there's no one else other than you, or there's a very limited amount of people. In a large company, it doesn't work like that. It might be that situation for your team, for an area you work for, or even a product that belongs to a larger ecosystem, but it's a bit different, right? And even from an ownership perspective of upside and how much you can make out of succeeding at a small company, I mean, it's sometimes pretty uncapped how much it can go. The second thing is a bit of a continuation of this, it's you or nobody. I think this is very different. Like it pushes you to risk a bit more. But it puts a lot of responsibility on you executing, testing, experimenting. And then there's a lot of transparency into if it worked, it was because of you. If it didn't, it also was because of you. In a larger company, it's easier to kind of have a safety net. It's easier to also have more people, maybe more experience, where you can you get to learn a lot. While in a small company, maybe you learn by your own mistakes. Hopefully they're not expensive mistakes. And last but not least, I think when it's your company, when you're part of the founding team, I mean, you gotta love the problem deeply, because you're gonna be there for so long. You're gonna be super deep into the dynamics that influence how a problem evolves. In a larger company, probably you're past the stage where you truly understand the big problem behind. You're now actually broken down into multiple problems. It's just a different setup. But I would say this is kind of the difference.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's recap some of that. And also Silva is joining us from Lisbon. So another people based out of Portugal. And hi. So you mentioned about sense of ownership. I agree. The sense of responsibility, and what I call the higher what is it? Lower the lows or higher the high. Like you just experience exactly a lot more, right? Like, exactly. you feel a lot more sense of achievement when things are going well, but you also feel a lot more the downturn when things are not going as well. And then just like you have to be passionate about the problem, because 100%. In big company, you might be able to switch teams or working on a different domain, but for startup, you're kind of just
that's the safety net. Exactly. Like here you have no other choice. You can choose another company, but like within this company, I mean, it's this or maybe nothing else.
Right. Let's unpack that for a little bit. So let's start from the first stage. I think some of us who are joining might be people who are looking to become a PM. So let's say right now with the economic environment, a lot of companies are slowing down hiring. But if they wanted to join, a startup as a PM, what do you think as a hiring manager? Like, what are you looking for a startup PM? And if someone is pivoting, let's say they have a lot of years of experience, but might not be a PN in title, how do you think those people, should interview for a startup PM position?
Yeah, it's a great question for people who are in that situation. I would say this, of course, as a true PM, I have to start with it depends, right? And in this case, it depends a bit on the culture of a company and the culture of the hiring person or the team that's hiring. I'm gonna maybe tell my own point of view. And in my team, the PMs have a big amount of responsibility and ownership, from the most junior person to the most senior person. I'm a very hands-off type of manager. At least that's what I get from their feedback. But that also pushes the bar on some traits that I need to look for this culture to work. And I generally look for 5 key things. I'd say the first one is independence. So I want people who are truly proactive at getting things done and really moving the moving the needle and getting the car going. I think it really matters on the independent side. The second one is sharpness. Like I want people who are really quick to get to the right details and cutting through the noise. Empathy, obviously, I think this is like in every single book. You need to be great at putting yourself in other people's shoes and connecting with those who have a problem that you're trying to solve for. Hustling, I think that competitive aspect, that curiosity almost, that you need to know why and you can't be stopped until you get there. And finally, I think communication, storytelling, being great narrators and being able to unpack complex things into simple messages that get people to follow you. I think these are kind of the 5 things I try to look for that fit my approach.
That's awesome. I already feel like your LinkedIn posts are usually so structured, like 3 things, 5 things, 7 things. And as you answer my question, I also can see like, oh, this becomes a post, the 5 things you're looking for a startup hiring. So I like your structured thinking. Already check the box for sharpness and cutting through the noise.
You also asked the question on career pivoting. Was that it?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's great, especially on the macro environment we're kind of living through. And I think, and this is kind of connected with that first question on like when I'm hiring. And I think the majority of people who end up in product, they fall into product. Falling into product is another word of you transition internally. You were not in product and you kind of transition into a PM within your company. And the reason I believe this happens is because product managers of PMs, product leaders, they tend to look for 3 things: knowledge of the product, knowledge of the industry, and knowledge of the discipline. Now, internally, you have knowledge of the product, probably you've been working with the product, and you have knowledge of the industry. You've been working in the industry. You might not have knowledge of the discipline, but that's a good PM leader can teach. Externally, you might have knowledge of the discipline, but probably you don't know the product. And maybe as you work in the industry, you might not know the industry. So you're kind of competing 2 against 1. And also people are already there. So I think it makes it easier. So if I'd have to give some advice on pivoting mid-career and you want to go into product, is look for those opportunities internally. And then as you go through your own challenges, I mean, we look for people who stand out, right? They're amazing at what they do. They have domain expertise. They're curious. So all the traits I mentioned, if you are able to shine those traits within your role, it's very likely you're going to get up in the radar. And then even if you don't know the discipline, I think we're going to talk about this. I mean, there's programs. I'm going to plug in 1 Month PM here on onemonthpm.com. That's a great way to get some knowledge of the discipline without disrupting your life. And I think it just prepares you for that moment where the transition becomes an opportunity. So that's my best advice.
I love that, the knowledge of the crafts, of the industry, of the product. So great shout out. And one LinkedIn users also agree with me that the posts are a pillar from you.
Great. Appreciate
lots of great gems and insight. Now, you mentioned a little bit about the crafts. Let's dive in. So startup is a pretty unique environment, right? You have pretty limited resource. You're kind of single laser focus on, let's say, one set of problem. What are some best ways for you with limited resource to sort of identify and validate that you're actually solving the right problem? One LinkedIn member also asked, Matthew, how do you avoid over engineering the problem? I think the question behind the question is kind of like, how do you avoid analysis paralysis, right? Like where you can do a lot of research, but you also need to act fast, but then you also need to make sure you're solving the right problem. What are some of your learnings when it comes to, deciding what to build and having a conviction for that's the right thing to build?
Sure. So this reminds me a bit about when we launched Kitch. Like our first office was, so Kitch is a SaaS product for restaurants, right? We launched Kitch. Our first office was inside a kitchen. That was the best place to actually learn how people are using the product, how are people going through the problems that we're hopefully trying to solve. And I think this is kind of a segue into how you avoid over-engineering the solution space, is you focus a bit more early, at least, on the problem space. And you do that by talking with people, the actual people who will be impacted by your solution, and trying to understand what they say in between the lines. Like a lot of people like to resort to data or surveys because it's comfortable for them, but actually going out and talking with the people and being as close as you can to what they go through when trying to solve the problem you're trying to tackle, I think it's key. I think another thing that is also key is really understanding where the problems you're trying to solve fit in their Maslow pyramid. Because the lower it is, the more core it is for them, the more incentivized they are to solve them. The higher it is, the further away. Maybe they'll pay a premium, but they need to be there to pay for it. And you need to realize, like, where are you solving for? Because then your solution space will be highly dependent on what you figure out. And even when you talk with people, what you really want to do, which is a great way to protect your scope, because this is, in the end of the day, what we're trying to talk is like, how do you identify and validate you're in the right problem spaces? You focus on how people are acting, their past behaviors, how they're choosing solutions, kind of hiring for jobs, a bit here on the jobs to be done theory, how they're hiring for the jobs they're trying to solve for. Because I think the best way to predict the future is looking to the past. So I think if you surround yourself in an environment that you get to see those problems, you're probably in a better place to find out whether you're solving for the right thing or not.
Awesome. I like that. You're knowing what you're solving and is it the right size of the problem, how important that problem is. I want to dive in a little bit more on that aspect. One of the questions I get asked a lot, probably the most popular question for startup PMs, are when you have an opinionated founders, right? Which, let's say you do some research, you realize that you want to pivot the strategy, or you have something else that you want to build, which is different from what the founder believes to be. How do you get buy-in when you are working in a startup and with a leader that has a very strong opinion that might be different from your opinion?
So opinionated founders, opinionated anyone. I think it's a big challenge. So I have an easy trick. This is kind of a funny story, but like there's something I call the double jab. The double jab is like when you have opinionated people, they generally, their opinion is a solution, is some idea that they have. The double jab is like whenever they share that opinion, you give a first jab, which is a why, like the first why. You ask why, and they'll give you an answer. They rationalize their opinion, and then you give a double jab, which is the second why, the why to their answer. Right. Generally, when it's an opinion with a very weak foundation, the second jab is actually a tough one to digest. They get nervous or they start to be defensive. And the goal with this trick is more to kind of explain that the best solution spaces are rooted in a very strong problem space. But when you get like a very strong answer to your second why, then maybe they're more right than wrong. And I think that's actually really important. But in the end of the day, it all comes down to a bit of empathy as well, like especially with founders. I mean, it's all about understanding why are they opinionated. Is it because they don't trust you, or is it maybe because they really care about the solution space, or maybe it's because they have little visibility, they lack visibility on what's being solved, and they're trying to overcompensate with their opinions. And I think finding this root cause really matters, because if you don't, you're just gonna fight. Like I'm a surfer, and it's like fighting the current of the sea. Like you can do that, but you're just gonna get tired and eventually drop and leave. They're not going anywhere. So I think if you try to empathize, try to see where they're coming from, and then make your own thought process on why you believe maybe that opinion is not right, I think you're gonna get into a better place.
Absolutely. I love the analogy of don't fight the tide, when you're surfing. And that's
Exactly.
usually the number one advice I give people as well, to empathize and actually understand the root cause of why they hold strong opinion about something.
Exactly.
That will help you shape your communication. There's some great questions from our community that I wanted to ask. One from Rahul was around, when you are in an early stage company, do you stick around one idea, or how, like you have a lot of different ideas that you wanted to validate? How does that process look like, especially when the resources and funding are limited? I think tangential to that, when you're at different stages of the startup, let's say you're in the later stage, do you still continue to define and validate hypotheses? how do you know what time to
Yeah.
pivot?
Yeah, both great questions. I think I love large idea spaces. I really like, or solution spaces, let's call it. And I think experimenting is really important. Where I don't think you should be like, over engineering is on the opportunity space or on the problem space. I think you should be very clear on the problem space that you want to solve for, on the type of problems you want to solve for, and connect them quite tightly to your vision on the reason, the purpose of you actually working, getting up from bed every morning and working on this. So I think being a bit more strict on the problem space and the opportunity space you want to tackle, and then being quite open and like what possibilities, what solutions can really help us tackle this. Apart from this, I think, or on top of this, I think it's very important to define what progress looks like. Can be traction, can be a specific metric, can be something that tells you that you're moving, ideally in the right direction. Ideally, you should have something connected to that vision that tells you, oh, we're getting close to it, right? So I think keeping track of that metric or number or something that shows you progress will tell you whether whatever you're building and testing and experimenting is getting you to move, is getting progress into you, or maybe if you should stop, pivot. I think after a couple of iterations, if you don't see that specific metric you assigned as progress moving, maybe that is the time to pivot. A bit on top of that pivoting, I mean, Kitch is a great example of that. Like our story, we launched Dark Kitchens, which was our flagship product, the reason why we started Kitch. And we launched in March 2020. That's when COVID kicked off well, lockdowns kicked off. And we actually launched on the day in Portugal where all restaurants closed by government order. And that makes every single restaurant a dark kitchen. Suddenly your product is no longer necessary to the world. And if that isn't some data point that tells you that you got to pivot, I mean, what is? So I think one is progress in your metric. The other one are very obvious factors that show you or push you to rethink the dynamics of your business. So I think with these two, you can associate, of course, funding as well. Like, we still have money to continue on our path, et cetera, et cetera. But I think these two are more common as the good reasons to pivot.
Absolutely. You touched upon a little bit when you were saying looking at the metrics. Is metric the only way that you would look at when it comes to determine if the product has found product market fit? What else would you use as factors to consider? Like, okay, we're on the right trajectory, we should double down versus pivot.
So PMF is funny. Like even with Kitch, like on the first weeks, because we pivoted, but we're still in food delivery. Food delivery with COVID was crazy growth. We're growing at 50%, sometimes 100% week over week. That was insane growth. I mean, that made us look at PMF or product market fit. It's a bit like dark matter. Like you can't see it, but when you understand the answers behind it, you can't not know it exists, right? It's a bit like that. So I think when I think about product market fit, first, I define market within product market fit a bit differently than most people. I try to look at market as the sum of people with a problem times the willingness they have to pay to solve it, right? You want both to be large. You want a large number of people with a problem times a large willingness to pay. Otherwise, you're not going to have much of a market. So you got to start there. Second, I think it's very important to find some way of measuring PMF progress. I think the one metric that I found the most useful was probably the one created by Chanel, if I'm not mistaken, from Growth Hacking. And he talks about how disappointed will you be if your product disappeared. It has like this 40% threshold, where if you're above 40% on very disappointed, you're kind of correlating with product market fit. There's a great article from Superhuman, I think from First Round Review, if I'm not mistaken. They talk about that. So I think finding, if this is your way or some other way to show, can be retention, can be something else. But I mean, marking as a number is really important. And then it's about balancing problem space and going deep enough, but then don't forget that you need to go into to solution space. I mean, I think Marty Kagan talks about this on Lenny's podcast, Lenny Ruchitsky, and he says like, a lot of people talk about problem space, spend too much time in problem space. It's important to be in the solution space as well and iterate, ideate. And I'd say that the final part is probably the magical experience, like the working backwards. I think Airbnb, Amazon, they work a lot with this framework. It's like you got to understand what is beautiful experience for the customer, what's magical, and then work backwards into what is your first version, how can you actually ship, because then you know you're in a path to give that magical experience, and all of these correlates with your ability to get to PMF.
Absolutely. I remember the 40% article as well. Basically, if you survey your users and say if your product disappear, if over 40% of them said they will be extremely disappointed if that happened, then you have achieved PMF. I think it's quite a magical number, a threshold.
It is.
Awesome. So we have one more question from the audience, Jose. So I wanted to actually ask this question with a slightly different spin. He's asking, given your experience working in big companies and startups, what are some unique learnings that sort of lessons learned along the journey? I think I like to know also for the audience that what are some key skills, that would help you excel at a startup environment as a product leader? For example, you mentioned, it's a lot of sense of ownership. There's a lot more risk. There's, you have to be able to really passionate about the problem. How would you translate that to, let's say, tangible skills that will excel you in this environment?
Yeah, so I'll probably answer the skills part first. Maybe I don't know if you're asking from a product leader perspective, but I'm going to go with a product leader perspective. And then I try to answer Jorge's 3 learnings. Got to think through. But I think on the most important skills, especially as you go from a PM to a PM leader, as you grow in your career, I always like to go back into the I think it's Elon Musk and Tesla. They talk about the importance of building the machine that builds the machine, like all the robots building the car, being the car, the end machine. I think there's an analogy or a correlation with this, which is I think the biggest thing I learned going from a contributor or PM into a product leader, manager of PMs, is that when you're a PM, your product and the features of your product, how you achieve your results, like improving the product is how you are successful as a PM. When you become a manager of PM, suddenly the team and their skills and capabilities are your products and your features respectively, and getting them better is how you achieve your goals. So I think the one thing maybe that becomes core, the most important thing as a PM manager, is probably your ability to understand what areas of your team need to be coached and how to coach that in your team. Because if their ability, those skills are the features of your product, then getting them better at that, it means your product gets better. And then as of course trickles down into the actual products you're shipping. I think the second skill maybe is discipline. I think as PMs, we're very used to context switching and being super curious and want to touch everywhere. And we're correlating with having like a 360 view of the entire company. And I think this as a PM manager becomes quite dangerous because you got to be very focused either on your new problem space, which is stuff like execution or productivity of your team or scalability or even the quality of what they do. That's actually the real problem space for you as a leader of any area, in product especially. If you don't have the discipline to keep yourself in the right problem space, you end up going too deep into the product. Suddenly you become micromanager, you become more of a shopping list owner that puts this down and makes your team almost project managers, which is really dangerous for the quality of the product. So I think being disciplined became a very important skill into a product leader, a transition from PM into product leadership. And to Jorge's question, I think, I don't know, top 3, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that it's going beyond the vanity of shipping. Right, it's a bit that discussion of like outcomes versus outputs, where theory says, oh yeah, outcomes are everything, you should focus on outcomes. It's actually not true. Outcomes are important to know where you want to get to, but outputs are the way that you throw more shots at the target, right? You just got to make those outputs cheap, rational, connected to the outcome. And it's important to understand that the outcome itself, the problem solved or the metric moved, is actually how you determine success as a PM, not how much you ship or how fast you ship. It's actually value created, right? So I think that's the maybe top learning. I'm going to focus on that.
Awesome. We're coming up on time. One question before we do our lightning round is you mentioned earlier in the chat that people could get better by learning product crafts. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to launch the 1 month PM program.
Yeah, so on launching it, so I believe that building software is going to be a commodity in the coming years. Every single person in the world will be able to create software. Writing code will actually be more, it'll be more rare than a typical process part of the process of building software. I think with stuff like no code or even Copilot from GitHub that kind of uses AI to write code for you, we're coming into that transition moment where kind of personal computers became ubiquitous and available to everyone. I think building software will be that in the coming future. I think even looking at now the examples of generative AI, where you got like prompts, you just speak or write, and suddenly stuff comes out like images or text. I think this is what's going to happen to software. So the true differentiating part is going to be product thinking, like understanding how to think like a product person, understanding people and all of the steps to build a successful product. But learning how to do this is really hard. Either you're already within a product role and you're able to learn from someone who's doing it, or learning it on a more formal approach is either very expensive or makes you take time off from your job, which is really hard in this situation, or doesn't actually exist in a way that fits your life. So I wanted to build something that accelerates this vision of how can I get as many people in the world able to think product, so that when it's completely available for anyone to build software, they know how to do it. And that's how 1 month PM came to life. So it's this live learning program, cohort based, that runs on a single month, 3 hours a week. It's as affordable as it can be. It's 99 euros for the entire program. It's taught by people who are doing this, are building product every single day, and they're putting up their time to teach others. It fits your busy life, as it's only 3 hours a week after hours, so after work, so you don't actually have to take time off. And it's all about hands-on tools, frameworks, stuff that you can actually use to start testing and experimenting with product. And it's been super successful so far. We launched a year ago. We had nearly 1,000 people joining, and we have programs around no code, Web3, foundations, growth, so much stuff that you can learn there. And I really believe this is, for me right now, the best way to bring this product thinking to everyone in a way that most people hopefully can access it. That's kind of the vision.
That's awesome. 1,000 people. I do agree that how to think is something that's really hard to teach, but is like such a core essence of product management. Yeah. I think the most important thing that I learned over the past few years being in the role that was different from like the consulting and operational role that I was in before was just being able to ask the right question and challenge, and don't just take things at face value, and being able to think very critically. So very, very important initiative and skill to learn. All right. So we're coming up at time. For every guest that we invite to our show, we have 3 lightning round of questions. Are you ready for the challenge?
Bring them on.
All right. John Rowe. All right. What is your favorite product currently?
Okay, product. Maybe Notion. I think it's like a brain outside my brain. It helps people think together. And in this world, like getting people asynchronously connecting, I think it becomes super important. I'd say my guilty product is Twitter. But I'd say like my core one where I spend a lot of time is Notion.
Notion, building your second brain. Awesome.
Yeah.
Who is your product role model, or who do you consider has been the most influential product leader in your career?
Role model. Okay. So I'm not a big fan of role models. There's a great book on role model and the problems of role models called Wanting by Luke Burgess, somewhere behind me. And I'd rather look at people who are strong at an area that I believe to be critical for my future, and then try to understand how they got to that. I'd say if I had to think about role model, I would look into Matthew McConaughey's speech, like from the Oscar where he says like, my role model is myself in 10 years. And then you just hustle every day to become that. And I think that's actually a very good framework. So that's how I think about role models.
That's a pretty good mental model, right?
Yeah.
To inspire yourself. All right. One last question. What is one final piece of advice or resource you like to offer to audience, who are listening to us right now?
Yeah, piece of advice. So in my program, I usually ask people, like, if you could speak with your younger self, like, what would you say to them? And it's this piece of advice. And what I usually answer is, so I got this advice and I repackaged based on how someone else explained it. I found it really useful. And it's like, increase your luck surface area. And this concept of luck surface area is like, if you believe luck is kind of random, then you got to increase the area where you might be lucky, where it rains on you. Right. And I think that's the best advice, is how to increase that luck surface areas. You read as much as possible. You surround with people who are ambitious, who are amazing, where you can learn from. When you think about, oh, I want to reach out to that person, you do it. You send that cold message, you might get a yes as an answer. You say yes to everything, especially the things that make you uncomfortable. I think that's how you expose yourself. You don't care about whether you have shame of something, like you're shameless. I think that's the type of things that really I would give advice to people. You'll be on the top 1% if you do these type of things, because the majority of people will not. And just that is an advice that will make you stand out against any challenge you have ahead of you.
Oh yeah, I love the advice, maximizing surface area of luck. I heard about that last June. I think that was the first motivation for me to get going with creating content.
And you're doing amazing. You're doing amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you so much, Andre, for joining us, and for everyone else who are joining us from the community. I hope you learn a lot from Andre, and so we're seeing a lot of people resonating with your advice as well. Love the advice that you're giving. So for folks who are joining us, we will be sending our recap of newsletter that goes out every Wednesday. So you'll get 5 key takeaways from our conversation today. Next week, we also have a special guest, Jackie, but we will be doing a special time, not on Friday, but on Wednesday. That's the time she's available. Obviously, she's very famous. She's the writer of Cracking the PM Interview that many of us know about, and she recently published a book on cracking the PM career. So we'll be talking more about how you crack PM interview and career with her next Wednesday. So make sure you check out. Links are also included in the newsletter, and looking forward to see many of you there. And thank you again, Andre, for joining us. And I'm sure you have lived up to the expectations. And I learned a lot from you. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.